The announcement echoed through the terminal at 3:42 a.m. Last call for Flight 628 to Kauai. My boarding pass trembled in my grip, already damp from nervous perspiration. 45 minutes away, in our home outside Portland, place settings for 28 guests remained untouched on the table I'd spent hours arranging yesterday evening. The enormous turkey that should have been defrosting sat like a frozen brick in our refrigerator, mirroring how my heart had felt for the past 4 years. My phone vibrated again. Another message from Marcus. "Hope you're starting prep. Mom keeps asking about the schedule." I powered it down completely and boarded the aircraft, leaving behind far more than just a holiday meal. I was escaping a life that had suffocated me gradually through years of backhanded compliments and constant criticism. As we climbed into the pre-dawn darkness, I pressed my forehead against the window and watched Portland's lights disappear beneath us. Down there somewhere, Patricia would arrive at 1 o'clock expecting her elaborate spread. Marcus would stand there bewildered, likely calling me irresponsible for the first time openly instead of in hushed conversations with his mother. But I wouldn't witness their reactions. I wouldn't be there to make excuses. For the first time in 4 years, I would simply be absent. That realization both terrified and exhilarated me. 4 days earlier, Patricia's footsteps across our wooden floors always sounded like a judge's gavel. Sharp, absolute, final. She entered our kitchen as though she held the deed, which Marcus often reminded me she practically did, having contributed to our down payment. "Natalie, sweetheart." Her voice carried that specific inflection she used when delegating tasks disguised as requests. "We should discuss the holiday arrangements." I stood elbow-deep in soapy water, having just served them dinner. Marcus's preferred beef brisket with accompaniments his mother had taught me to prepare correctly during our first year together. My skin was raw from the scalding water, but I'd stopped wearing protective gloves around Patricia. She'd once remarked they made me appear unprofessional. "Absolutely," I responded, injecting false enthusiasm into my tone. "How may I assist?" Marcus glanced up from his device long enough to exchange a look with his mother, one of thousands I'd witnessed over the years. A wordless exchange that excluded me entirely, treating me like a child incapable of adult discussions. Patricia retrieved a folded document from her expensive handbag, handling it with such ceremony that my stomach clenched. She positioned it beside me with the precision of someone presenting courtroom evidence. "The guest roster for Thursday," she declared. "I've expanded our numbers this year. Cousin Margaret is bringing her fiancé. Uncle Bernard is coming with his entire clan, and the Whitcombs from the yacht club will be joining us." I dried my hands and picked up the paper. As I unfolded it, names continued appearing. I counted twice, certain I'd miscounted. 28 people. The words emerged barely audible. 30 technically. Young Timothy Whitcomb counts as half since he's only 5. But prepare for 28 full servings. Growing children need extra. Patricia's laugh sounded like shattering crystal. "I realize it's substantial, but you've become exceptional at managing these family functions. Everyone constantly praises your culinary skills." Marcus finally looked up, only to nod agreement. "You've got this, babe. You always deliver." I stared at the roster, my vision blurring as I tried processing their expectations. Previous years we'd hosted perhaps 12 people, and even that required me to begin cooking 48 hours early, barely sleeping, spending the entire meal shuttling between kitchen and dining area while everyone else relaxed. When were all these people invited? I asked, my voice weaker than intended. "Over recent weeks," Patricia said dismissively. "Don't worry about logistics, dear. You'll manage brilliantly. You always do. But I haven't purchased groceries for 28 people. I haven't planned." "Oh, I handled the planning." Patricia produced another document covered in her meticulous handwriting. "Here's the complete menu. I've elevated several items this year. The Whitcombs expect certain standards. You understand. I examined the menu and felt the room tilt slightly. Turkey with 3 distinct stuffings. Glazed ham. Different sides. 5 desserts, including homemade pie crust because store-bought was unacceptable. Fresh cranberry sauce. Homemade dinner rolls. Patricia, this is overwhelming for one person. She waved dismissively as if I'd mentioned trivial weather concerns. Nonsense. You're entirely capable. Besides, Marcus will help. I looked at my husband, hoping for acknowledgement that his mother's request bordered on impossible. Instead, he'd returned to his phone screen. I'll definitely pitch in, he said without looking up. I can slice the turkey and pour drinks. Slice the turkey. Pour drinks. That constituted his contribution for a meal requiring approximately 14 hours of continuous work. What time should preparations begin? I asked, though instinctively knowing the answer would be unreasonable. Patricia checked her designer timepiece. Well, dinner should be served precisely at 1 o'clock. The Whitcombs prefer early dining. I'd suggest starting around 5 a.m. to ensure everything's perfect. Perhaps 4:30 if you want absolute perfection. 5 a.m., I echoed. Morning start, she said more firmly, handing me the guest roster. And ensure everything's flawless this time. The dressing was somewhat dry last year. The dressing I'd prepared while simultaneously managing 7 other dishes while he watched sports. The dressing everyone else had complimented. The dressing his mother had specifically requested again. Of course, I heard myself saying. I'll ensure perfection. But standing there clutching that list of 30 names and an impossible menu, something cold settled deep within me. It wasn't just the impossibility of their assignment. It was their casual expectation, as if my time, effort, and sanity were resources they could spend without consideration. Later, after Patricia departed and Marcus fell asleep, I sat at our kitchen table with a calculator attempting logistics. The turkey alone needed oven time starting 6 a.m. to finish by 1 p.m., but I'd need that oven space for numerous other dishes. The mathematics didn't work. The timeline was impossible. I found myself studying the guest roster, truly examining it for the first time. 30 people, but my name wasn't listed. I was preparing food for 30 guests, yet wasn't considered a dinner participant. Then I noticed something else. Marcus's cousin Sophie wasn't included. Sophie, who'd attended family holidays for years. Sophie, recently divorced and struggling. I called her immediately. Natalie, it's rather late. Everything all right? I was wondering, are you joining us for the holiday? Long pause. Well, Patricia called last week. She suggested that given my current single status and difficult circumstances, perhaps I'd be more comfortable at a smaller, more appropriate gathering. She thought I might prefer something less elaborate for my situation. My grip tightened on the phone. She excluded you. She didn't phrase it that way, but essentially, yes. Sophie had been family for 7 years. But the moment her life became complicated, the moment she might need support instead of providing entertainment value, Patricia had removed her from consideration. After hanging up, I sat in darkness for an extended period. The roster blurred before me as tears I'd suppressed for hours finally emerged. But these weren't merely frustration tears about impossible expectations ahead. These were recognition tears, because I saw myself reflected in Sophie's situation. I understood what happened when you stopped being useful to Patricia. When you stopped being the perfect daughter-in-law who could accomplish impossible feasts without complaint. When you became more trouble than valuable. I was one failed holiday away from being excluded from my own existence. Tuesday morning, the supermarket at dawn felt like a fluorescent wasteland. I'd been there since opening, my cart overflowing with ingredients for an increasingly impossible meal. 3 turkeys, 2 hams, countless pounds of vegetables requiring prep, chopping, and cooking into submission. The checkout total made my hands shake as I used our credit card, knowing Marcus would notice the charge and probably comment about expenses. Mrs. Chen from across the street stood behind me with coffee and muffins, eyeing my overflowing cart with concern. "Having quite a gathering this year?" she asked. "Holiday dinner for 30, I replied, attempting casualness. Her eyes widened. 30? By yourself? My husband will assist, I said automatically, though the words tasted false. She studied me carefully. Honey, that's not assistance. That's watching someone drown from the shore. Her words echoed in my head as I began preparation. I spread ingredients across every available surface, transforming our kitchen into something resembling commercial food prep rather than a home. By midday, I'd worked 6 straight hours and barely dented the required tasks. My back ached, my feet throbbed, and I'd eaten nothing except crackers. That's when Marcus wandered in, still in pajamas, coffee mug in hand. "Wow, really going big this year," he observed, surveying the chaos. "Already smells amazing." I was elbow-deep in turkey stuffing, my hands coated with breadcrumbs, celery and raw egg. "Can you help me get this inside the bird? I can't manage alone." He checked his watch. "Actually, I promised the guys golf. Pre-holiday tradition. But I'll be back with plenty of time to help tomorrow with heavy lifting." I stared at him. "Golf? Today? Just 9 holes, maybe 18 if we're moving well. You've got everything under control anyway. You're like a machine with this stuff." Like a machine. The words struck harder than they should have. Machines don't tire. Machines don't need assistance. Machines don't have feelings to hurt through casual dismissal. He left before I could respond, abandoning me with 30 people's food and the growing awareness that I'd become invisible in my own home. The afternoon passed in chopping, seasoning, and pre-cooking what could be prepared early. Every surface held dishes at various completion stages. The refrigerator was so packed I played Tetris with containers just fitting everything inside. Around 6 p.m. Patricia called. "Just checking preparations, dear. How's everything progressing?" I looked around the disaster zone. At my raw, bleeding hands from constant washing and food prep. At the mountain of accumulated dishes. "Fine," I said. "Everything's fine. Wonderful. Oh, I forgot mentioning, the Whitcomb boy has severe nut allergies. You'll need ensuring none of the dishes contain nuts or have cross-contamination. Life-threatening situation if there's any exposure." A nut allergy she was mentioning now, the day before, after I'd already prepared 4 dishes containing almonds or pecans. Which dishes exactly? "Oh, I'm certain you'll figure it out. You're so skilled at managing these details. See you tomorrow, dear." She disconnected before I could ask any of the dozen questions flooding my mind. I stood in my kitchen surrounded by evidence of 14 hours non-stop work and felt something crack inside my chest. Not break, that would come later. Just crack like the first fissure in a dam holding back too much pressure for too long. That night, Marcus came home smelling like beer and golf courses, cheerful from his freedom day while I'd been trapped in preparation hell. "How'd cooking go, babe? Everything ready for tomorrow's marathon?" I sat at the kitchen table, finally resting for the first time since dawn. My entire body ached and I hadn't eaten a proper meal all day. "There's a problem with the menu," I said quietly. 4 dishes have nuts and apparently the Whitcomb boy has severe allergies. Marcus shrugged. "So make different versions." "No big deal. No big deal." For completely different dishes requiring entirely new ingredients and preparation time I didn't have, on top of everything else already attempted. "Marcus, I need help. Real help. Not just slicing turkey. I need you cooking some dishes." He looked genuinely surprised. "But you're so much better at cooking than me. And Mom specifically requested your green bean casserole and stuffing. People come expecting your food. Then maybe people can come expecting your food too," I snapped, exhaustion finally breaking through my carefully maintained politeness. The sharpness startled him. We'd been married 4 years and I'd never used that tone before. Okay, you're obviously stressed. Look, I'll definitely help tomorrow. Promise. But tonight, I'm pretty exhausted from golf and I've got that early meeting I need being fresh for. What early meeting? Tomorrow is the holiday. Conference call with the Tokyo office. Time zone thing. But it'll only be an hour, maybe 2. I'll be done way before people arrive. Another unmentioned obligation. Another way I'd handle morning chaos completely alone. I looked at my husband, truly looked at him, and saw a stranger. When had he become someone who could watch me work to exhaustion and feel no obligation helping? When had I become someone whose struggles were so invisible they didn't register as real problems? I'm going to bed, I said. Finally. Good idea. Get rest. Big day tomorrow. As I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I calculated mentally. If I woke at 4:30, I could have turkeys in the oven by 5. That gave me 9 hours preparing 8 sides, making fresh rolls, preparing 5 desserts, and creating nut-free alternatives for 4 now prohibited dishes. 9 hours for what should be 18 hours work. The mathematics didn't work. The timeline was impossible. And yet somehow I was expected accomplishing it because I always accomplished it. That's when I realized the most devastating truth. I had trained them treating me this way. Every time I'd pulled off an impossible dinner, every time I'd smiled and said, of course, when asked to do the unreasonable, every time I'd apologized for things that weren't my fault, I had taught them my limits didn't matter. I had made myself indispensable and invisible simultaneously. I set my alarm for 4:30 and closed my eyes, though sleep seemed as impossible as the task waiting in hours. Wednesday, 3:12 a.m. I woke before my alarm, my body jolting awake from a dream where I ran through an endless kitchen while faceless people shouted orders. The house was completely dark and silent except for Marcus's steady breathing beside me. For a moment, I lay there in darkness, and a strange thought crossed my mind. What would happen if I simply didn't get up? What if I stayed in bed and let the alarm ring? What if 30 people showed up to an empty table and had to figure out their own dinner for once? The thought was so foreign, so completely counter to everything I'd been conditioned doing, that it almost made me laugh. Almost. But then I imagined Patricia's face arriving to chaos instead of perfection. I imagined Marcus's confusion realizing I wasn't going to fix everything like I always did. I imagined 30 people who'd made no alternative plans, who'd brought nothing to contribute, standing around looking at each other. And for the first time in years, I felt something besides dread about a family gathering. Felt curious. I slipped from bed without waking Marcus and padded downstairs to the kitchen. In early morning darkness, surrounded by yesterday's prep work evidence, I allowed myself truly thinking about the unthinkable. What if I left? Not forever, not dramatically. Just left. Got in my car and drove somewhere else. Let them handle one meal without me. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating simultaneously. I'd never in 29 years of life simply not shown up to something expected of me. I'd never let anyone down. I'd never put my own needs before someone else's convenience. I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table looking at the guest roster still lying where Patricia had placed it 4 days ago. 30 names. 30 people expecting me sacrificing my sleep, health, and sanity providing them a perfect meal while they provided nothing except criticism if things weren't exactly right. I picked up my phone and impulsively opened a travel website just to look. Just to see what was possible. The first result made my breath catch. Last-minute holiday getaway to Hawaii. Limited seats available. Depart early Thursday morning. Return Sunday. Hawaii. I'd always wanted visiting Hawaii, but Marcus preferred destinations with good golf courses and business networking opportunities. Hawaii's just beaches and tourist traps, he'd always said. What would we do there all day? I clicked on the listing before I could talk myself out of it. The flight departed at 4:40 a.m., almost exactly when I was supposed to start cooking. The price was high, much higher than Marcus would ever approve for spontaneous vacation. But it was our money too. Our joint account I'd contributed to equally, even though he earned more, and somehow that gave him veto power over major purchases. I stared at the booking screen for an extended period, my finger hovering over the select flight button. What kind of person abandons 30 people on a holiday? But another voice in my head, quieter but somehow stronger, asked, what kind of person expects one individual handling 30 people's dinner with no help? I thought about Sophie, excluded from a family she'd been part of for 7 years because her divorce made her inconvenient. I thought about Marcus dismissing my requests for help like they were unreasonable demands instead of desperate pleas. I thought about Patricia casually mentioning a life-threatening allergy the day before dinner, as if my ability completely restructuring the menu overnight was assumed. I thought about who I used to be before I became the person who always said yes, who always made it work, who always apologized for not being perfect enough. Before I could change my mind, I clicked Select Flight. The next screen asked for passenger information. I typed my name, my birth date, my information. Just mine. A party of one. There was something powerful about seeing my name on that booking form all by itself. Natalie Chen, not Marcus's wife. Not Patricia's daughter-in-law. Just me. I entered our credit card information and clicked Book Now before I could think too hard about what I was doing. The confirmation email arrived immediately. Flight 628 to Kauai. Departing 4:40 a.m. Gate A9. Check-in recommended 2 hours prior, which meant I needed leaving for the airport at 2 a.m. In 9 hours, I should be pulling the first turkey from the oven. Instead, I'd be somewhere over the Pacific Ocean watching sunrise from 30,000 feet. The realization of what I'd just done hit me like physical force. I was actually going to do this. I was going to disappear Thursday morning and let them figure out their own dinner. Part of me expected feeling guilt or panic or the urge canceling the flight and returning to my preparations. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Anticipation. I spent the remaining early morning hours moving through the house like a ghost, packing a small suitcase with summer clothes I hadn't worn in months. Swimsuits buried in my drawer. Sundresses Marcus always said were too casual for places we went together. As I packed, I found myself thinking about all the holidays I'd orchestrated over the years. All the preparation hours, the stress, the exhaustion. All the times I'd eaten my own dinner cold because I'd been too busy serving everyone else. All the compliments that went to Patricia for hosting lovely gatherings while I remained invisible in the kitchen. I was folding a blue sundress when Marcus's phone rang on his nightstand. It was 3:30 a.m. Who called at 3:30 a.m. unless it was an emergency? I crept closer to listen. Marcus, your mother. I know it's early, but I couldn't sleep. I'm so worried about tomorrow. Even through the phone, I could hear the anxiety in Patricia's voice. Mom, what's wrong? Is everything okay? I just keep thinking about the Whitcomb boys' allergy. What if Natalie doesn't properly handle the cross-contamination issue? What if something happens to that child in our home? The liability alone. My hands clenched into fists. She was calling at 3:30 a.m. to worry about my competence, not about the impossible task she'd assigned me or whether I might need support. She'll handle it, Mom. She always does. Natalie's great with this stuff. But what if she's not careful enough? What if she's overwhelmed? 30 people is quite substantial, even for someone as capable as Natalie. Now she acknowledged it was substantial. Now, when it was too late changing anything, when I'd already spent days in preparation hell. If you were so worried about the numbers, why didn't you mention that when you invited everyone? Marcus's voice carried irritation, but it was directed at his mother for waking him, not for the impossible situation she'd created. Well, I suppose I could call a few people and uninvite them. At 3:30 a.m. the night before? Mom, just let Natalie handle it. She's probably already up cooking anyway. I looked toward the kitchen where I should indeed be cooking, where I should be starting the impossible marathon that would consume the next 14 hours of my life. Instead, I zipped my suitcase closed and carried it quietly downstairs. I left a note on the kitchen counter next to Patricia's guest roster. Kept it simple. Marcus, something came up and I had to leave town. You'll need to handle the holiday dinner. The groceries are in the fridge. Natalie. I didn't apologize. I didn't explain. I didn't offer suggestions for salvaging the meal or provide detailed instructions. For once in my life, I simply stated facts and left them to figure out the rest. As I loaded my suitcase into my car, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. I looked different somehow. Not just tired, I'd looked tired for years. I looked determined. The drive to the airport was surreal. The roads were empty except for a few other early travelers and night shift workers heading home. I'd driven these same streets thousands of times, but never at this hour, never for this reason. Never with this sense of stepping completely outside my normal life. At the airport, checking in for the flight felt like crossing a threshold I couldn't uncross. The gate agent, a woman about my age with kind eyes, looked at my ticket. Nice holiday plan. Getting away from family chaos. I almost laughed at how perfectly she'd summarized it. Something like that. Smart woman. I'm working today, but if I could afford escaping to Hawaii instead of dealing with my mother-in-law's commentary on my casserole, I'd do it in a heartbeat. As I waited for boarding, I turned my phone to airplane mode without checking for messages. I didn't want seeing Marcus's confused texts when he woke and found my note. I didn't want seeing Patricia's panic when she arrived to chaos instead of perfection. The gate agent's voice crackled through speakers. Now boarding flight 628 to Kauai. Welcome aboard. As I walked down the jetway, I realized this was the first time in 4 years that I was going somewhere Marcus hadn't approved, somewhere Patricia hadn't vetted, somewhere I'd chosen entirely for myself. The flight attendant welcomed me aboard with a smile that seemed recognizing something in my face. The look of someone stepping into freedom. As I settled into my window seat and watched the ground crew prepare for departure, I thought about what was happening back home. Marcus would be waking in a few hours to find an empty kitchen and a note that would change everything. 30 people would be arriving in 8 hours expecting a feast, and there would be no one there to provide it. For the first time in my adult life, their problem was not my problem to solve. The plane pushed back from the gate just as the first hints of dawn appeared on the horizon. As we lifted into the sky, I pressed my face to the window and watched my old life disappear below the clouds. Thursday, 8:47 a.m. Marcus's perspective. Marcus Chen woke to his alarm with the lazy contentment of someone who had no idea his world was about to implode. He rolled over, expecting to find Natalie's side of the bed empty as usual on holiday morning. She was always up before dawn, making magic happen in the kitchen. But something felt different. The house was too quiet. By 8 a.m. on the holiday, the smell of roasting turkey usually filled every room, and the sound of Natalie's orchestrated chaos in the kitchen served as comforting soundtrack to his slow morning routine. Instead, silence. He padded downstairs in his boxers, expecting to find his wife surrounded by controlled culinary mayhem. Probably looking a bit frazzled, but handling everything with the competent efficiency that had attracted him to her in the first place. The kitchen was empty. Not just empty of people, empty of activity. The ingredients from yesterday's prep work sat exactly where Natalie had left them. No turkey in the oven, no pots bubbling on the stove, no evidence that the holiday marathon had begun. On the counter next to his mother's guest roster sat a folded piece of paper with his name on it in Natalie's handwriting. Even as he unfolded it, some part of his brain refused accepting what he was reading. Marcus, something came up and I had to leave town. You'll need to handle the holiday dinner. The groceries are in the fridge. Natalie. He read it 3 times before the words began making sense. She was gone. Natalie, his wife, who had never missed a family obligation, who had never failed delivering a perfect meal, who had never left him to handle anything domestic, was gone. His first thought was that someone must have died. A family emergency requiring her immediate departure. He grabbed his phone and called her. Straight to voicemail. Natalie, I found your note. What happened? Whose emergency? Call me back immediately. People are going to start arriving in 7 hours, and I need knowing when you'll be back. He hung up and called again. Voicemail again. That's when panic began setting in. Not panic about the dinner. That seemed too enormous processing yet. Panic about his wife who always answered her phone, who never went anywhere without telling him exactly where she'd be and when she'd return. He called her sister Diana. Marcus, it's early. Is everything okay? Is Natalie with you? Did someone in your family? Is there an emergency? What? Everyone's fine. Why would Natalie be here? Isn't she cooking your holiday feast? The way Diana said, your holiday feast, carried an edge he'd never noticed before. Like she knew something about their holiday arrangements that she didn't approve. She left a note saying she had to leave town. I thought maybe. She left. Diana's voice shifted from sleepy confusion to something that sounded almost like admiration. Good for her. Good for her. Diana, 30 people are coming for dinner in 7 hours and she's vanished. 30 people. Marcus, are you insane? You expected your wife cooking for 30 people by herself. The judgment in her voice stung. She's good at this stuff. She likes hosting. She likes hosting intimate dinners with friends, not feeding an army of your relatives who treat her like hired help. Marcus ended the call, disturbed by Diana's reaction. Why was everyone acting like this was somehow his fault? He tried Natalie's phone again. Voicemail. 9:30 a.m. His conference call with Tokyo started in 30 minutes. The call he couldn't miss, the one that could determine his promotion timeline for the next year. But 30 people were expecting dinner in less than 5 hours. He opened the refrigerator and stared at the contents. The raw turkeys looked back at him accusingly. He'd never cooked a turkey in his life. He'd never cooked anything more complicated than scrambled eggs. His phone rang. His mother. Good morning, darling. How are preparations coming along? Is Natalie managing the timeline properly? Mom, we have a problem. What kind of problem? Did she burn something already? I told you we should have hired caterers for a dinner this size. Natalie's gone. Silence. Then. Gone where? I don't know. She left a note saying something came up and she had to leave town. She's not answering her phone. That's impossible. Natalie would never abandon a dinner party, especially not today. There must be some misunderstanding. Marcus looked at the note again as if it might have changed. There's no misunderstanding. She's gone and we have 30 people coming for dinner. The silence stretched so long that Marcus wondered if the call had dropped. Mother! This is a disaster. Her voice had gone cold and sharp. An absolute disaster. What kind of wife abandons her family on a holiday? Something about the way she said it, the immediate assumption that Natalie was the villain in this scenario, made Marcus defensive in a way that surprised him. Maybe she had an emergency. Maybe something happened that she couldn't. What emergency requires someone abandoning 30 dinner guests without any notice? What emergency prevents someone from answering their phone to explain the situation? Marcus didn't have an answer to that. We need fixing this immediately, Patricia continued, her voice taking on the command tone she used when managing family crises. Call every decent restaurant in town. See if any can prepare an emergency holiday dinner for 30 people. Marcus spent the next hour on the phone with restaurants, catering companies, and hotels. Every conversation went the same way. Laughter followed by information that their holiday dinners had been booked for months. "Sir," said the manager of the Marriott, "it's 10 a.m. on the holiday. Even if we had availability, which we don't, there's no way preparing a dinner for 30 people with 3 hours' notice." By 11 a.m., Marcus had exhausted every professional option. His Tokyo conference call had come and gone, ignored. He'd probably damaged his relationship with his biggest client, but that seemed secondary to the immediate crisis. He called his mother back. "Any luck with restaurants?" "Nothing. Everyone's booked." "What do we do?" "We cook it ourselves, obviously." Marcus looked at the raw turkeys again. "Mom, I don't know how to cook a turkey. I don't know how to cook any of this." "Then you learn. YouTube exists. How hard can it be?" Patricia arrived with her sleeves rolled up and a grim expression suggesting she was preparing for battle. She surveyed the kitchen like a general assessing a battlefield where all soldiers had deserted. "This is worse than I thought," she announced. "These turkeys should have been in the oven 5 hours ago. They'll never be ready in time." Marcus, who had spent the last hour watching YouTube videos about turkey preparation while growing increasingly panicked, looked up from his phone with desperate hope. "Can we cook them faster? Higher temperature somehow?" "Marcus, darling, you cannot rush a 20-pound turkey. Physics doesn't bend to accommodate your wife's abandonment issues." They worked in tense silence for the next hour. Patricia barking instructions while Marcus fumbled through tasks that Natalie had always made look effortless. The stuffing ingredients sat in bowls, looking like components for a science experiment neither of them understood. The green bean casserole recipe might as well have been written in ancient Greek. "Where is the stand mixer?" Patricia demanded, rifling through cabinets. "I don't know. Natalie always handles the kitchen stuff." "Well, Natalie isn't here, is she?" At noon, Marcus's phone started ringing with calls from relatives asking about arrival times and dietary restrictions. Each conversation became more uncomfortable than the last. "Hey Marcus, it's Uncle Bernard. Should I bring something?" "I know Patricia said everything was covered, but the wife made extra stuffing just in case." "Actually, Uncle Bernard, maybe you should bring the stuffing. And maybe anything else your wife might have made as backup." "Backup? Is everything okay?" Marcus looked at his mother, who was attempting to wrestle a raw turkey into a roasting pan while cursing under her breath. "Just bring whatever you have." By 1 p.m., word had spread through the family network that something was wrong with dinner preparations. Marcus's phone buzzed constantly with confused relatives offering to help, asking questions, or trying to figure out if they should make alternative plans. The kitchen had descended into chaos. Patricia had managed getting one turkey into the oven, but it was clear to both of them that it wouldn't be ready until evening. The side dishes remained untouched. The elegant timeline Natalie always maintained had collapsed into panic and improvisation. "This is humiliating," Patricia said, flour in her hair and defeat in her voice. "Absolutely humiliating. The Whitcombs are going to think we're incompetent." "Maybe we should just cancel," Marcus suggested weakly. "Cancel? We cannot cancel holiday dinner at 1 p.m. on the holiday. Do you have any idea what people will think?" But Marcus was beginning to realize that what people thought was the least of his problems. The doorbell rang like a death knell. Marcus opened the door to find Cousin Margaret and her fiancé standing on the porch with wine and expectant smiles. "Something smells interesting," Margaret said, sniffing the air with obvious confusion. Instead of rich aromas of a holiday feast, the house smelled like raw onions and panic sweat. "We're running a little behind schedule," Marcus said, his voice strained with false cheerfulness. More cars pulled into the driveway. Uncle Bernard with his arms full of backup dishes. The Whitcombs with their 5-year-old son and obvious expectations of the high-class dinner Patricia had promised them. Cousin after cousin, friend after friend, all arriving to find Marcus standing in the doorway looking like he was greeting mourners at a funeral. "Where's Natalie?" asked Aunt Louise, looking around for the hostess who usually greeted everyone with genuine warmth and promise of an amazing meal. She had to step out. Emergency. The living room filled with increasingly confused relatives. Conversations grew stilted as people realized something was seriously wrong. The dining room table set with Natalie's careful place settings from days ago stood ready for a feast that didn't exist. Patricia emerged from the kitchen looking like she'd been through a war. Her perfect hair was disheveled, her clothes stained with various food substances, and her usual composure had cracked to reveal something close to panic. "Everyone, please be patient. We've had some unexpected challenges with meal preparation." Mr. Whitcomb, a man accustomed to yacht club service and fine dining, looked at his watch pointedly. "We were told dinner would be served at 1 p.m. It's nearly that time now." "Yes, well, there have been some complications." "What kind of complications?" The question came from Marcus's cousin, Jennifer, who had driven 4 hours with her family and was beginning to look annoyed. Marcus and Patricia exchanged glances. Neither wanted being the one to explain that the woman they'd all taken for granted had simply vanished, leaving them helpless. "Natalie had to leave town suddenly," Marcus said finally. "Family emergency." The room fell silent as 30 people processed this information. "She left today." This from Sophie's sister, who, unlike Sophie, had made the guest list. What kind of emergency happens at 5 a.m. on holiday morning? Marcus didn't have an answer. Uncle Bernard cleared his throat. "Well, what's the plan for dinner then?" All eyes turned to Marcus and Patricia. 30 people who had made no backup plans, brought no substantial food contributions, and arranged their entire day around a meal that had been promised to them. "We're working on it," Patricia said weakly. Little Timothy Whitcomb, the 5-year-old with the severe nut allergy, tugged on his mother's dress. "Mommy, I'm hungry. When are we eating?" His innocent question seemed breaking whatever spell had been keeping the room politely quiet. Suddenly, everyone was talking at once. "Maybe we should order pizza. Pizza places aren't open on holidays. What about Chinese food with a 5-year-old who has food allergies? This is insane. We should have been told earlier. Where exactly did Natalie go? How long have you known she wasn't going to be here?" Marcus felt the walls closing in around him. 30 pairs of eyes, all looking to him for answers he didn't have, solutions he couldn't provide. That's when his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Natalie's number. The entire room seemed sensing his reaction as he opened the message. Everyone fell silent, waiting to hear what his missing wife had to say. The text contained a single photo. Natalie, wearing a blue sundress he'd never seen before, sitting at a beachside restaurant with a tropical drink in her hand. Her hair was loose and flowing in the ocean breeze. Her face was turned toward the camera with an expression of pure, radiant peace. Below the photo, a simple message. "Holiday dinner in paradise. Tell Patricia the turkey is her problem now." Marcus stared at the phone, his brain struggling processing what he was seeing. His wife, his reliable, predictable, always accommodating wife, was in Hawaii. She wasn't handling a family emergency. She wasn't planning to return in time saving dinner. She had planned this. She had chosen this. She had abandoned 30 people on the holiday. And from the look on her face in that photo, she had absolutely no regrets about it. "Marcus." His mother's voice seemed coming from very far away. "What does she say?" He looked up at 30 expectant faces. His mother, who had created this impossible situation. His relatives, who had never once offered helping with the massive productions Natalie orchestrated for them. The Whitcombs, who were already looking around the room with barely concealed disdain. all of them waiting for him to fix what Natalie had broken by refusing to be broken anymore. She says. Marcus's voice cracked. She says the turkey is our problem now. The room erupted. The Mai Tai was stronger than I'd expected. But then again, I'd expected nothing about this day to go according to anyone's plan. I sat at the open-air restaurant overlooking Poipu Beach, my blue sundress catching the trade winds, and watched the sun paint diamonds across the Pacific. It was exactly 1 p.m. Hawaiian time, which meant it was 6 p.m. back home. Right now, 30 people should be sitting down to a perfect holiday feast in my dining room. Instead, I was having coconut shrimp and watching sea turtles surface in crystal clear water. My phone had been buzzing constantly since I turned it back on an hour ago. 14 missed calls from Marcus, 7 from Patricia, text messages from relatives I hadn't heard from in months, all suddenly very concerned about my well-being. I scrolled through them with detached curiosity, like reading about someone else's life. Marcus. Where are you? This isn't funny anymore. Marcus. Call me immediately. We need to talk about this. Marcus. People are asking questions I can't answer. Patricia. Natalie, whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. Come home and fix this. Patricia. This is beyond selfish. You're embarrassing the entire family. Cousin Margaret. Marcus says you had a family emergency. Is everything okay? Aunt Louise. Honey, we're worried about you. Please call someone and let us know you're safe. I almost laughed at that last one. They were worried about me now. After 4 years of watching me work myself into exhaustion for their benefit, now they were concerned about my safety. I took another sip of my Mai Tai and opened my camera app. The sunset behind me was turning the sky into shades of orange and pink that looked too beautiful to be real. I took a selfie, making sure to capture both my genuinely happy expression and the paradise backdrop. Then I sent it to Marcus with a message I'd been composing in my head for the past 9 hours. Holiday dinner in paradise. Tell Patricia the turkey is her problem now. The response came within seconds. My phone rang immediately. I let it go to voicemail. Then I turned the phone off completely and ordered another Mai Tai. By 9 p.m., the great holiday disaster had reached legendary status in the family. Half the relatives had left to find restaurants that might still be serving food. The other half had gathered in the kitchen, attempting salvaging something resembling a meal from the chaos Marcus and Patricia had created. Uncle Bernard had taken charge of the turkey situation, declaring that they could cut the birds up and cook the pieces separately to speed up the process. Cousin Jennifer was attempting making mashed potatoes from scratch while consulting YouTube tutorials. The Whitcomb family had left entirely, citing concerns about food safety and their son's allergies. Marcus sat at the kitchen table staring at Natalie's text message for the 100th time. Each viewing made the reality more surreal and more devastating. She wasn't coming back. She hadn't been kidnapped or hospitalized or forced handling someone else's emergency. She had made a choice to leave them all behind, and she was clearly enjoying every moment of it. This is what happens when you spoil someone too much, Patricia announced to the room as she attempted salvaging the green bean casserole. Give them too much freedom and they think they can just abandon their responsibilities whenever they feel like it. But even as she said it, her voice lacked its usual conviction, because somewhere in the chaos of the day, the impossible nature of what they'd expected Natalie accomplishing had become visible. It had taken 7 adults 5 hours just getting the turkeys in the oven and starting 4 side dishes. What Natalie had been doing alone year after year was starting to look less like wifely duty and more like a minor miracle. Maybe we should have helped her more, said Uncle Bernard quietly as he struggled figuring out how to properly season the turkey pieces. Help her. Patricia's voice was sharp. She never asked for help. She always insisted on doing everything herself. Marcus looked up from his phone. She asked me for help 4 days ago. I told her I was too tired from golf. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of boiling water and the timer ticking down on the oven. She asked for help on Tuesday, Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger as the memory became clearer. She told me she needed real help, not just slicing the turkey. And I told her she was better at cooking than I was. He could see the scene now with painful clarity. Natalie's exhausted face, her raw hands from hours of food prep, her desperate request for actual assistance, and his casual dismissal of her needs because helping would have been inconvenient for him. "She's been asking for help for years," said Diana's voice from the doorway. Marcus looked up to see his sister-in-law standing there with a container of food and an expression of barely contained anger. "Diana, what are you doing here? I brought sweet potato casserole since I figured you might need actual food." She set the container on the counter with more force than necessary. "I also came to tell you what I should have told you years ago." She looked around the room at the assembled relatives, all of whom had stopped their cooking attempts to listen. "Natalie didn't abandon you," Diana said, her voice cutting through the kitchen noise. "You abandoned her. All of you. For 4 years, you've watched her work herself to death for your comfort. And not one of you ever thought to say, hey, maybe one person shouldn't be responsible for feeding 30 people alone." "Now wait just a minute," Patricia started. But Diana cut her off. "No, you wait. Do you have any idea what Natalie's holiday preparation looked like?" She started planning the menu 4 weeks in advance. She spent 3 days shopping for ingredients. She got up at 4:30 a.m. to start cooking, and she didn't sit down until after dishes were done at 10 p.m. 16 hours of non-stop work, while the rest of you watched sports and complained if the stuffing was too dry. Marcus felt something cold settling in his stomach. She never said it was that much work. Of course she didn't say it because every time she tried expressing that she was overwhelmed, you told her she was so good at it and better at cooking than everyone else. You turned her competence into a prison. The kitchen was completely silent now. Even the timer seemed to have stopped ticking. And when she finally couldn't take it anymore and left, your first concern wasn't, "Is my wife okay?" Or, "Why was she so unhappy that she felt this was her only option?" Your first concern was, "Who's going to cook the turkey?" Marcus looked at the text message again. In the photo, Natalie looked happier than he'd seen her in years. Her smile was genuine, unforced, free of the careful politeness she wore around his family. When was the last time she'd smiled at him like that? When was the last time he'd done anything to make her smile like that? "She's in Hawaii," he said quietly. Diana nodded. "Good for her. She's always wanted going to Hawaii." "She never told me that." "She told you lots of things, Marcus. You just never listened." I woke up in my hotel room to the sound of waves and warm Hawaiian breeze flowing through the open balcony doors. For a moment I lay perfectly still, savoring the unfamiliar sensation of waking naturally instead of to an alarm, of having nowhere I needed being and nothing I needed accomplishing for anyone else. It was 10:15 a.m. Back home, I would already be dealing with leftover turkey and the aftermath of hosting 30 people. I'd be loading the dishwasher for the 5th time, wrapping endless containers of food, and planning the elaborate leftover meals that would stretch the holiday into the following week. Instead, I was going to order room service and spend the day on the beach. When I finally turned my phone back on, it had exploded with messages. But these weren't just from Marcus and Patricia anymore. They were from relatives I hadn't spoken to directly in years, from friends who had heard about the great holiday catastrophe through the family grapevine, from people who apparently had opinions about my decision prioritizing my own well-being. Most surprising were the messages of support. "Diana, I'm so proud of you. You should see the looks on their faces." Marcus's cousin Sophie, "I heard what you did. I wish I'd had your courage when Patricia excluded me." My old college roommate Maya, "Diana told me about your Hawaii escape. Enjoy every minute." But there were other messages too. "Patricia, I hope you're satisfied. You've ruined the holiday for 30 people and embarrassed your husband in front of his colleagues. Marcus's brother Derek. Real mature Natalie. Way to destroy a family tradition over a temper tantrum. Some of Marcus's cousins, people I'd cooked for and cleaned up after for years, had apparently decided I was selfish and ungrateful. The criticism stung, but not as much as I'd expected it to. Because for every message calling me selfish, there was another from someone who understood exactly why I'd left. My phone rang. Marcus again. This time I answered. Natalie. His voice was rough, like he hadn't slept. Thank God. Are you okay? Are you safe? I'm fine, Marcus. I'm in Hawaii. Hawaii. What are you doing in Hawaii? I'm on vacation. Something I've wanted doing for years. But you can't just leave town without telling me. You can't just abandon holiday dinner. People were counting on you. I looked out at the ocean where a group of dolphins was playing in the surf. People were counting on me doing something impossible without any help. I decided not doing that anymore. It's not impossible. You've done it before. I've nearly killed myself doing it before. There's a difference. There was a long silence on the line. Look, whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. Come home and we'll talk about getting you more help next year. More help. Like I was asking for a favor instead of basic human consideration. What kind of help, Marcus? I don't know. Maybe we could hire someone serving the food so you don't have to run back and forth. What about cooking the food? Well, you're so much better at that than anyone else. And there was the fundamental misunderstanding that had defined our entire marriage. Marcus genuinely believed that my ability handling impossible tasks meant I should handle them, not that the tasks were unreasonable to begin with. Marcus, do you know how many hours I spent preparing for yesterday's dinner? I don't know. A lot. 34 hours over 4 days. I calculated it while sitting on the plane. Silence. And do you know how many hours you spent helping me? That's not fair. I was going to help with serving and cleanup. How many hours, Marcus? More silence. Maybe an hour total. Slicing turkey and pouring drinks. So I was responsible for 33 hours of work, and you were responsible for 1 hour. But I enjoy cooking. I'm good at it. I closed my eyes and tried finding words to explain something that should have been obvious. Marcus, I do enjoy cooking. I enjoy cooking dinner for my family. I enjoy making special meals for holidays. What I don't enjoy is being solely responsible for feeding 30 people while everyone else watches sports and critiques my effort. So what do you want me doing? I can't just become a chef overnight. I want you understanding that what your mother asked me doing was unreasonable. I want you understanding that saying, "You're so good at it," is not the same as appreciating the work I do. And I want you understanding that I'm a person with limits, not a machine that produces perfect dinners on demand. Another long silence. Are you coming home? I looked at my hotel room, at my suitcase full of clothes I'd never worn because Marcus thought they were too casual, at the paradise waiting for me just outside the door. I'm coming home eventually. Good. We can. But things are going to be different, Marcus. Different how? I'm done being the only person responsible for your family's comfort. I'm done apologizing for not being perfect. And I'm done pretending that what happened yesterday was my fault instead of the inevitable result of years of taking me for granted. I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line, processing what I was saying. So what does that mean? It means that next year, if your mother wants inviting 30 people for the holiday, she can cook for 30 people, or she can hire caterers, or she can accept that family gatherings don't have to be elaborate productions. But she cannot expect me sacrificing my health and sanity for her social ambitions. She's going to hate that. Then she'll hate it. That's not my problem anymore. Natalie, you're being unreasonable. Family comes first. That's what marriage is about. I felt something snap inside me, clean and final. Whose family, Marcus? Because your family has made it very clear over the years that I'm not really part of it. I'm the help. I'm the person who makes things nice for everyone else, but I'm not actually considered when decisions are made. That's not true. Really. When your mother made the guest roster, did she ask me if I could handle cooking for 30 people? When she decided upgrading the menu, did she consider whether I had the time and energy for all those extra dishes? When she mentioned the nut allergy at the last minute, did she think about how that would affect my preparation? She probably assumed. She assumed I would handle it because I always handle it. Just like you assumed I would handle it. Neither of you considered whether it was fair asking me to handle it. I could hear voices in the background. His family probably gathering for leftover turkey and post-mortem analysis of the great holiday disaster. I have to go, Marcus said finally. But we need finishing this conversation when you get home. Yes, we do. Part 14. After I hung up, I sat on my balcony for a long time, thinking about the conversation and what it meant for my marriage. Marcus still didn't understand what he'd done wrong. He still thought this was about me being ungrateful rather than about years of systematic dismissal of my needs and feelings. But for the first time in our relationship, I had stated my boundaries clearly and without apology. I had said no to something that was unreasonable, and I had stuck to it even when it disappointed people. It felt terrifying and liberating at the same time. I ordered a tropical fruit plate from room service and spent the day reading a novel on the beach, something I hadn't done in years. Every few hours, I took a photo of my surroundings and posted it to social media with captions like, "Learning to put myself first," and "Paradise is a state of mind." I knew Marcus's family was probably seeing these posts. I knew they were probably analyzing every word for signs of mental breakdown or evidence of selfishness. I didn't care anymore. For 4 days, I was going to be exactly as selfish as they'd accused me of being. I was going to think only about my own comfort, my own desires, my own happiness. It was going to be the best vacation of my life. The flight back to reality was turbulent, both literally and metaphorically. As we descended through storm clouds toward Portland, I felt my phone buzzing back to life with messages I'd been ignoring for the past day. Marcus, what time does your flight land? I'll pick you up. Diana, how was Paradise? Ready to come back and set some boundaries. Patricia, we need having a family meeting about your behavior. This cannot happen again. That last message made me laugh out loud, earning a concerned look from the businessman in the seat next to me. Patricia wanted having a family meeting about my behavior, as if I were a teenager who had missed curfew instead of a grown woman who had refused being taken advantage of. The airport was crowded with post-holiday travelers, all of us looking slightly shell-shocked by the transition from vacation time back to real-world responsibilities. But as I walked through the terminal, I noticed something different about my own reflection in the shop windows. I stood straighter. My face looked relaxed in a way it hadn't in years. Marcus was waiting for me at baggage claim, looking like he hadn't slept well in days. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and there were dark circles under his eyes that made him look older than his 32 years. "Hi," he said when he saw me approaching. "Hi." We stood there for a moment, two people who had been married for 4 years, suddenly unsure how to interact with each other. "How was your trip?" he asked finally. It was exactly what I needed. He waited for me to elaborate, but I didn't. The old Natalie would have filled the awkward silence with apologies and explanations, reassuring him that everything was fine and normal could resume immediately. The new Natalie just collected her suitcase and walked toward the parking garage. The drive home was mostly silent, punctuated only by Marcus's occasional attempts at conversation that I answered briefly and without enthusiasm. I wasn't trying to be cold. I was just done performing emotional labor for his comfort. As we pulled into our driveway, Marcus finally asked the question that had obviously been eating at him. So what happens now? I looked at our house, the house where I'd spent 4 years making myself smaller and smaller to accommodate everyone else's needs, and felt a strange mix of familiarity and detachment. Now we figure out if our marriage can survive me having boundaries. I was barely finished unpacking when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, I could see Patricia standing on our front porch with the posture of someone preparing for battle. I considered not answering, but that would only delay the inevitable conversation. "Patricia," I said as I opened the door. "How nice seeing you." She pushed past me into the house without waiting for an invitation, her high heels clicking against the hardwood floor with their familiar sound of authority. "We need to talk," she announced, settling herself on our living room couch as if she were holding court. "I figured we might. What you did on Thursday was unacceptable. Absolutely unacceptable. Do you have any idea how humiliating it was having to explain your absence to 30 people?" I sat across from her in the chair Marcus always said was too formal for everyday use but had always been my favorite spot in the room. "I imagine it was very difficult," I said calmly. She seemed taken aback by my tone, which was neither defensive nor apologetic. "Difficult? It was a disaster, Natalie. Complete disaster. The Whitcombs are telling everyone at the yacht club that we can't be trusted hosting a proper dinner party. Cousin Margaret's fiancé thinks our entire family is dysfunctional. Uncle Bernard spent 5 hours trying to cook turkeys he had no idea how to prepare. That sounds very stressful for everyone. Are you mocking me?" "Not at all. I'm genuinely sorry that everyone had a stressful holiday. I'm sure it was very difficult suddenly being responsible for tasks they'd never had to handle before." Patricia's eyes narrowed. "Tasks they'd never had to handle before because you always insisted on doing everything yourself. And there was the fundamental rewrite of history that I'd been expecting. I insisted on doing everything myself. You never asked for help. You never indicated that you were overwhelmed. You just took control of every holiday gathering and then apparently resented us for letting you." I felt the familiar anger rising in my chest. But this time I didn't push it down or try managing it for her comfort. "Patricia, I asked for help dozens of times over the years. I asked Marcus to help with cooking. I suggested potluck-style gatherings where everyone contributed dishes. I mentioned that 30 people might be too many for one person handling. I don't recall those conversations." "Of course you don't. Because every time I suggested that the arrangements were becoming unmanageable, you told me I was so capable and such a wonderful hostess, and that you couldn't imagine anyone else handling things as well as I did." She was quiet for a moment, and I could see her mentally reviewing past conversations, possibly recognizing the truth in what I was saying. "Well," she said finally, "even if that's true, abandoning 30 people without notice is not the appropriate response. Adults communicate their needs clearly instead of throwing tantrums." "You're right," I said, and I saw surprise flicker across her face. "Adults do communicate their needs clearly, which is what I'm doing now." "What do you mean?" "I mean I'm clearly communicating that I will not be cooking holiday dinner for 30 people ever again. I will not be solely responsible for any family gathering of more than 6 people. And I will not be treated like hired help who should be grateful for the opportunity serving everyone else." Patricia's composure finally cracked. "You ungrateful little—" "Careful," I interrupted, my voice still calm but carrying an edge that made her stop mid-sentence. "You're about to say something that will permanently damage our relationship." We stared at each other across the living room, and for the first time in 4 years, I didn't look away first. "Here's what's going to happen going forward," I continued. "If you want hosting large family gatherings, you can cook for them yourself or hire caterers, or organize potluck-style meals where everyone contributes. What you cannot do is assign me the work while taking credit for the hospitality. Marcus will never agree to this. Then Marcus and I will have some decisions making about our marriage. You would divorce your husband over holiday dinner?" I considered the question seriously before answering. I would divorce my husband over being treated like my contributions don't matter, my time isn't valuable, and my well-being is less important than everyone else's convenience. The holiday dinner was just the most obvious example of a much bigger problem. Patricia stood up, her purse clutched tightly in her hands. This isn't over, Natalie. You're right. It's not over. It's just beginning. I'm finally standing up for myself, and you're going to have to decide how you want responding to that. After she left, I sat in my favorite chair for a long time, replaying the conversation. Part of me felt guilty for being so direct, so unyielding in my position. The old Natalie would already be planning how to smooth things over, how to apologize for speaking too harshly, how to find a compromise that made everyone else comfortable. But the new Natalie, the woman who had discovered her own strength on a beach in Hawaii, recognized that this conversation had been 4 years overdue. That evening, Marcus came home from work to find me cooking dinner. Just for the two of us. Nothing elaborate, nothing designed impressing anyone. Grilled salmon and vegetables, simple and uncomplicated. Smells good, he said, kissing my cheek in the automatic way married couples do. Thanks. How was your day? Long. People are still talking about Thursday. My boss heard about it somehow and made some joke about my wife abandoning ship. It was embarrassing. I set down my spatula and turned to face him. Marcus, I need asking you something, and I need you really thinking about your answer. Something in my tone made him pay attention in a way he hadn't in years. Okay. Do you think what happened Thursday was my fault? He opened his mouth answering quickly, then seemed catching himself. It was complicated. That's not what I asked. Do you think it was my fault that 30 people didn't have holiday dinner? You were the one who left. That's still not what I asked. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him actually thinking about the question instead of giving me the automatic response. I guess I think you could have handled it differently. How should I have handled it differently? You could have talked to me about feeling overwhelmed. We could have figured something out together. I turned back to the stove, more sad than angry. Marcus, I did talk to you about feeling overwhelmed. 4 days before the holiday, I told you I needed real help. You told me you were too tired from golf. But I meant I would help during the actual dinner. With slicing turkey and pouring drinks. 1 hour of help for a meal that required 34 hours of preparation. I could feel him processing this information, maybe for the first time really understanding the mathematics of what I'd been doing. I didn't realize it was that much work. Because you never asked. In 4 years of marriage, you've never once asked me how much time I spend preparing for your family's dinners. You just assumed it was easy because I made it look easy. I turned the heat off under the salmon and faced him again. Marcus, I need knowing. Do you see me as your partner? Or do you see me as someone whose job it is making your life comfortable? That's not fair. Of course you're my partner. Then why don't you know anything about the work I do maintaining our life? Why don't you know how I spend my time? What I struggle with? What I need help with? He started answering, then stopped. I could see him realizing that he didn't have a good response. I guess I just assumed. I thought you liked doing all the hosting stuff. I like some of it. I like cooking for people I care about. I like creating beautiful experiences. What I don't like is being taken for granted. What I don't like is being assigned impossible tasks and then criticized when they're not perfect. So what do you want from me? It was the first time in our entire marriage that he'd asked me that question directly. I want you seeing me. I want you noticing when I'm struggling and offering to help without being asked. I want you valuing my time and energy the same way you value your own. And I want you standing up to your mother when she treats me like hired help instead of family. Stand up to my mother. Marcus, she excluded your cousin Sophie because Sophie's divorce made her inconvenient. She assigned me a task that would have challenged a restaurant kitchen and then acted like it was a reasonable request. She mentioned a life-threatening allergy the day before the dinner. And when I finally couldn't take it anymore, she called me ungrateful. Marcus was quiet for a long time. She came by today, I continued. She told me that what I did was unacceptable and that I need apologizing to everyone for ruining the holiday. What did you tell her? I told her that I won't be cooking for 30 people ever again. I told her that if she wants hosting large gatherings, she can do the work herself or hire someone doing it. Marcus's face went pale. Natalie, you can't just. She's my mother. And I'm your wife. The question is, which relationship matters more to you? The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of the exhaust fan and the distant hum of the refrigerator. That's not fair, Marcus said finally. You're making me choose. No, Marcus. Life is making you choose. I'm just finally telling you what I need instead of pretending I don't need anything. He sat down heavily at the kitchen table, looking older than I'd ever seen him. I don't know how doing this. I don't know how standing up to her. For the first time since I'd returned from Hawaii, I felt a flicker of hope, because admitting he didn't know how was different from refusing to try. You start by acknowledging that what she asked me doing was unreasonable, I said softly. You start by telling her that you're sorry you let me handle all that work alone for so many years. And if she doesn't accept that, if she gets angry, then she gets angry. Marcus, your mother's feelings are not more important than your wife's well-being. He looked up at me, really looked at me, and I could see him trying understanding something that had been invisible to him for years. I'm scared, he said quietly. I'm scared that if I change how things work with my family, I'll lose them. You might lose them, I said honestly. Some people can't handle it when the people they've taken advantage of start setting boundaries. But Marcus, you've already been losing me. 4 years. You've been losing me a little bit every time you chose their comfort over my well-being. I sat down across from him at the table where we'd shared thousands of meals, where I'd planned countless dinner parties, where I'd made grocery lists for feasts I'd cook alone. I love you, I said. I've loved you since the day we met. But I can't live the rest of my life being invisible in my own marriage. I can't keep sacrificing my health and happiness so everyone else can avoid doing their share of the work. So what happens now? Now you decide what kind of husband you want being and what kind of marriage you want having. And if I choose wrong? I reached across the table and took his hand, the first time I'd initiated physical contact since returning from Hawaii. Then we'll both know where we stand. 1 year later. I woke up naturally at 9:15 a.m., sunlight streaming through the windows of our bedroom. From the kitchen downstairs, I could hear the sounds of Marcus starting coffee and the quiet voices of Diana and her family who had arrived the night before. This year we were hosting 6 people for holiday dinner. Marcus's brother and his wife, Diana and her husband and 2 children, an elderly neighbor who had nowhere else going. 6 people instead of 30. A manageable, intimate gathering where everyone was contributing something and no one person was responsible for the entire production. Patricia was spending the holiday with the Whitcombs at their yacht club, where she'd hired a professional catering service ensuring everything was properly managed. She'd made it clear that our new boundaries were unacceptable to her, and that she considered our scaled-back celebration to be disappointing compared to the elaborate productions of previous years. Marcus had been devastated at first when she'd essentially uninvited us from the larger family gatherings. But over the past year, as he'd gotten knowing me again, really knowing me, not just the version of me that existed serving everyone else, he'd started understanding what I'd been trying telling him. The turning point had come in March when Patricia had tried assigning me the catering for Marcus's cousin's baby shower. Instead of automatically accepting, I'd said I'd be happy contributing a dish but wouldn't be handling the entire event. Marcus had backed me up. He'd actually called his mother and explained that Natalie was his partner, not the family's unpaid event coordinator, and that future gatherings would need being planned differently. The conversation had been difficult. Patricia had accused him of being controlled by his wife and had threatened cutting off contact if he didn't get Natalie back in line. But Marcus had held firm. And in doing so, he'd finally chosen our marriage over his mother's expectations. Now, as I got dressed in comfortable jeans and a sweater, no need for the elaborate outfits I used wearing when trying impressing 30 guests, I could hear laughter from downstairs. Diana's children playing with Marcus. My brother-in-law Derek helping Marcus prep vegetables for the stuffing. When I walked into the kitchen, Marcus looked up from the sweet potatoes he was peeling and smiled. The first genuine, unforced smile he'd given me in years. "Good morning, beautiful. Ready for our first real holiday?" "Our first real holiday," I agreed, kissing him softly. Diana looked up from where she was showing her daughter how making cranberry sauce from scratch. "How does it feel waking up at a normal time on holiday morning?" "Like a revelation," I said, pouring myself coffee from the pot Marcus had made. "Like I'm finally a guest at my own holiday." The doorbell rang and Marcus went answering. "Continue." Through the kitchen window, I could see Mrs. Chen from across the street standing on our porch with a pumpkin pie and a bottle of wine. Last year, she'd been the one telling me that watching someone drown while standing on the shore wasn't help. This year, she was joining us for dinner because everyone deserved having somewhere to belong on the holiday. As the morning progressed, our small group worked together preparing the meal. Not just Marcus and me but everyone. Diana's husband carved the turkey while Marcus made gravy from scratch, something he'd learned doing over the past year. Derek and his wife handled the side dishes they'd volunteered bringing. Even the children helped by setting the table and arranging the flowers. By 1 p.m. we were sitting around our dining room table. Not the elaborate formal setup I used creating for 30 people, but a warm, comfortable arrangement that actually allowed for conversation. As we went around the table sharing what we were grateful for, I found myself thinking about the woman I'd been a year ago. The woman who had been drowning in other people's expectations while everyone watched from the shore. When it was my turn speaking, I looked around at the faces of people who saw me as a person, not as a service provider. "I'm grateful for learning the difference between being needed and being used," I said. "I'm grateful for discovering that I can love people without sacrificing myself for them. And I'm grateful for finding out who I really am when I'm not trying being perfect for everyone else." Marcus reached over and squeezed my hand. "I'm grateful that my wife taught me how being a better husband," he said. "Even when it meant she had to go to Hawaii getting my attention." Everyone laughed, and I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete contentment with exactly where I was and who I was with. After dinner, as we all cleaned up together, everyone contributing, no one person stuck with all the work, I stepped out onto our back porch for a moment of quiet. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a split second I tensed, wondering if it might be Patricia with some criticism or demand. Instead, it was a photo from Sophie, Marcus's cousin who had been excluded from the family gatherings last year. She'd sent a picture of herself at a Friendsgiving celebration with a group of people I didn't recognize, all of them laughing around a table full of food. Her message read, "Thank you for showing me it's okay choosing happiness over obligation. Having the best holiday of my life with people who actually want me here." I smiled and put my phone away without responding. Some messages didn't need responses. They just needed being received and appreciated. Marcus appeared beside me on the porch, wrapping his arms around me from behind. "Regrets?" he asked softly. I leaned back against him and looked up at the stars that were just beginning appearing in the evening sky. "About Hawaii. Never. About us. About how hard this year has been." I turned in his arms so I could see his face. "Marcus, this year has been the first year of our marriage where I felt like I mattered, where I felt like my voice was heard and my needs were considered. It's been hard, but it's been real. I'm sorry it took me so long understanding. I'm sorry it took me so long demanding understanding." We stood there for a moment in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of our family cleaning up inside. Of normal people doing normal amounts of work and sharing normal amounts of responsibility. "So what's the plan for next year?" Marcus asked. "Same group, same size, same boundaries," I said firmly. "Whatever else changes, that stays the same." "Good," he said, kissing the top of my head. "I like the woman who sets boundaries. I like her a lot better than the woman who pretended she didn't have any." As we walked back inside together, I caught a glimpse of myself in the hallway mirror. The woman looking back at me was relaxed, confident, genuinely happy. She was someone I recognized. Not the people-pleasing ghost I'd become over the years, but the person I'd been before I learned making myself smaller for everyone else's comfort. She was someone I was proud being. In the kitchen, Diana was loading the last of the dishes into the dishwasher while her children played quietly in the living room. Derek and his wife were packing up the leftovers they were taking home. Everyone was contributing to the cleanup just like everyone had contributed to the meal. "This was perfect," Diana said, hugging me goodbye. "Exactly what the holiday should be." "Intimate," agreed Derek's wife. "Actually relaxing instead of feeling like a performance." After everyone had gone home, Marcus and I sat together on our couch, both of us tired but satisfied in a way I hadn't felt after a holiday in years. "I have something for you," Marcus said, reaching into his jacket pocket. "It's not Christmas yet," I protested. "It's not a Christmas gift. It's an apology gift and a promise gift." He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a round-trip ticket to Hawaii, departing the day after Christmas. "For both of us this time," he said. "I figured it was time I saw what paradise looks like through your eyes." I looked at the ticket, then at my husband, who had spent the past year learning how seeing me as a person instead of a service provider. "Marcus Chen," I said, using his full name the way I had when we were dating and everything felt possible. "You just might be worth keeping after all." He laughed and pulled me closer. "Natalie Chen," he said. "I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never feel invisible again." Outside, the first snow of the season was beginning falling, covering our neighborhood in clean white silence. But inside our house, everything felt warm and bright and full of possibility. I had learned choosing myself without losing the people who truly mattered. I had learned that love doesn't require sacrifice of self, but recognition of self. And I had learned that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is simply refuse to disappear.